Right now, at this exact moment, Iranian engineers are conducting final integration tests on Chinese-origin carrier-killer missile technology at a secure facility 30 kilometers southeast of Isfahan. The Pentagon convened an emergency National Security Council meeting at 0400 hours Eastern Time this morning. China's Defense Ministry issued a statement 40 minutes ago denying any technology transfer occurred. Iran's Revolutionary Guard commander just posted on social media that Iran's defensive capabilities have reached a new threshold that our enemies will soon regret testing. One of these governments is lying, and the implications could reshape the entire military balance in the Persian Gulf within 72 hours. Let me walk you through exactly what happened and why the United States military is treating this as the most significant strategic development in the Middle East since Iran's nuclear program crossed weapons-grade enrichment capability. At 1,430 hours local time on Thursday, March 12, 2026, commercial satellite imagery from Planet Labs detected unusual activity at Iran's Shahid Hemmet Industrial Group facility outside Isfahan. Analysis teams identified 3 large transport vehicles consistent with Chinese WS 2400 heavy equipment haulers entering the compound's secured northern perimeter. By 1820 hours, thermal imaging from overhead reconnaissance assets detected elevated heat signatures in Building 17, the facility's primary missile integration laboratory, indicating active manufacturing or assembly operations occurring on an emergency timeline. At 2,145 hours, signals intelligence intercepted encrypted communications between Isfahan and the Imam Khomeini Space Center referencing Dragon Pearl delivery complete and vertical integration protocols initiated. Dragon Pearl is assessed to be Iranian code designation for Chinese missile technology packages. At 0215 hours Friday morning, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command detected a Chinese Y-20 strategic transport aircraft departing Tehran's Mehrabad airport after a 14-hour ground stop, its third such flight to Iran in the past 11 days. The aircraft's flight path and fuel consumption analysis indicates it arrived with maximum cargo capacity and departed near empty weight. At 0340 hours, the Pentagon's Joint Staff J-2 Intelligence Directorate upgraded the situation to Priority 1 status and briefed senior leadership. 40 minutes later, National Security Advisor was conducting video conference with combatant commanders across 3 time zones. To understand why this development has triggered emergency-level responses across the United States defense establishment, you need to understand exactly what technology China appears to have transferred and what capabilities it provides Iran. The DF-21 is not an ordinary ballistic missile. This is the world's first and most sophisticated anti-ship ballistic missile specifically designed to destroy aircraft carriers while they maneuver at sea. The system represents a quantum leap beyond Iran's existing Shahab and Sejal missile inventory. Standard ballistic missiles follow predictable parabolic trajectories that naval defense systems can intercept with reasonable probability. The DF-21 employs maneuvering re-entry vehicle technology with terminal phase guidance enabling the warhead to adjust course during final descent based on real-time target tracking data. The missile launches from mobile transporter erector launcher platforms, climbs to approximately 150 kilometers altitude on a semi-ballistic trajectory, then deploys its maneuvering warhead, which uses a combination of radar and infrared sensors to locate and track the target carrier. During final approach at speeds exceeding Mach 10, the warhead executes lateral maneuvers up to 30 kilometers off the predicted impact point, defeating traditional ballistic missile defense systems optimized for non-maneuvering targets. Range exceeds 1,500 kilometers, meaning Iranian launchers positioned anywhere in Iranian territory can strike American carriers operating in the Persian Gulf, Gulf of Oman, or northern Arabian Sea. The warhead carries either a conventional 1,500 kilogram penetrator or, in nightmare scenarios, a nuclear device. Even conventional warheads striking a Nimitz-class carrier at hypersonic velocity would penetrate multiple deck levels, potentially detonating aircraft fuel and ordnance, causing catastrophic damage that could mission kill or sink the vessel. The strategic significance extends beyond raw capability specifications. For 30 years, American carrier strike groups have represented unchallenged power projection platforms in the Persian Gulf region. Iran possessed no credible means to threaten these $70 billion capital ships protected by layered Aegis defense systems, SM-6 interceptors, and combat air patrols. This imbalance shaped Iran's entire strategic calculus and military doctrine. Now, if Iran has acquired functional DF-21 technology or even substantial components enabling indigenous production, the carrier invulnerability assumption collapses. Suddenly, operating carriers within missile range becomes acceptable risk calculation rather than guaranteed dominance. This forces fundamental revision of American force posture, potentially requiring carriers to operate beyond effective aircraft combat radius or accept unprecedented vulnerability levels. Here's the strategic context that explains why China would risk providing this technology now and what calculations are driving both Beijing and Tehran. From China's perspective, this represents sophisticated strategic gamesmanship designed to accomplish multiple objectives simultaneously without direct military confrontation with the United States. First, providing Iran with carrier-killer capability creates what strategists call asymmetric cost imposition. The United States must now invest billions in additional missile defense systems, modify carrier operating procedures, potentially develop new ship classes less vulnerable to ballistic missile attack, and fundamentally restructure Pacific and Middle Eastern naval deployments. Every dollar and hour the Pentagon dedicates to countering Iran's enhanced missile threat represents resources unavailable for countering China's own military expansion in the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait. Second, enhanced Iranian capabilities complicate American multi-theater contingency planning. If major crisis erupts between China and the United States over Taiwan, American war planners previously assumed they could safely ignore Middle Eastern theaters because Iran lacked means to threaten forward-deployed carrier groups. Now, Iran possesses capability to inflict catastrophic losses on American naval power, forcing the Pentagon to maintain substantial forces in Middle East even during Pacific crisis. This divides American attention and resources precisely when concentration of force becomes most critical. Third, China demonstrates to regional partners and potential arms customers that Chinese weapons systems perform at peer level with American equivalents. Successfully providing carrier-killer technology to Iran while avoiding direct attribution showcases Chinese defense industry sophistication and willingness to arm anti-American forces, strengthening China's position in global arms markets worth hundreds of billions annually. According to Dr. Toshi Yoshihara, Senior Fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments and former professor at the U.S. Naval War College, China's potential transfer of DF-21 technology to Iran represents the most significant shift in regional military balance since nuclear weapons proliferation to Pakistan. This fundamentally alters deterrence equations across two critical theaters simultaneously. From Iran's perspective, acquiring this technology addresses the regime's most critical strategic vulnerability. Iran's conventional military forces cannot match American technological superiority in direct engagement. The Islamic Republic has therefore pursued asymmetric warfare strategies using proxies, cyber attacks, mine warfare, and ballistic missiles to impose costs without inviting overwhelming retaliation. Carrier-killer capability elevates Iran's asymmetric toolkit from harassment level to existential threat level against American power projection. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has repeatedly emphasized that Iran must achieve deterrence through denial, making American military intervention so costly and uncertain that Washington chooses restraint over confrontation. Functional anti-ship ballistic missiles deliver precisely this capability. Even probability of successfully striking one carrier creates deterrent effect far exceeding actual missiles in inventory. This mirrors how China's own DF-21 arsenal shapes American Pacific strategy despite never being fired in combat. Additionally, Iran faces escalating pressure from Israeli threats to strike nuclear facilities and American economic warfare, crushing Iran's economy. Enhanced missile capabilities provide negotiating leverage, demonstrating that military action against Iran carries risks even the United States might find unacceptable. The timing proves particularly significant. Reports indicate intensifying contacts between Iranian and Chinese defense officials coinciding with renewed nuclear negotiations and increasing Israeli rhetoric about preventive strikes on enrichment facilities. There are three possible scenarios for how this situation develops, and the next 72 to 96 hours will determine which trajectory materializes. Scenario 1 represents diplomatic and intelligence de-escalation, where China and Iran walk back the technology transfer either through genuine policy reversal or elaborate deception operations designed to obscure what actually occurred. Probability assessment, 28%. For this scenario to unfold, several conditions must materialize. China would need to calculate that the strategic gains from arming Iran are outweighed by risks of fundamentally damaging United States-China relations at a moment when economic interdependence remains critical to Chinese growth. Beijing might offer private assurances to Washington that no operational technology transfer occurred and that satellite imagery represents misidentification of legitimate civilian industrial activity. Iran would need to assess that claiming enhanced capability while avoiding actual deployment provides deterrent benefit without triggering preemptive Israeli or American strikes on the missiles themselves. Both nations would leverage information ambiguity, allowing United States intelligence to remain uncertain whether functional systems actually exist, creating deterrence through doubt rather than confirmed capability. The United States would need to accept this ambiguity rather than demanding proof, requiring military action if denied. Historical precedents include multiple instances where weapons transfers were reported, denied, and never conclusively confirmed, allowing all parties to preserve strategic flexibility. However, this scenario's probability remains relatively low because the technology transfer appears too advanced to convincingly deny and benefits to Iran too substantial to voluntarily relinquish. Scenario 2 involves controlled escalation where Iran deploys the systems, but within constraints designed to avoid triggering preemptive attacks while still achieving deterrent effect. Probability assessment, 44%. This represents the most likely trajectory based on strategic incentives for all parties. Iran would announce successful indigenous development of anti-ship ballistic missile capability, framing it as domestic technological achievement rather than Chinese import to avoid international arms control violations. The systems would be displayed publicly in military parades or promotional videos, establishing credible capability claim without providing precise location intelligence, enabling targeted strikes. Iran would deploy launchers to hardened underground facilities or mobile platforms with sophisticated concealment, presenting verification challenges that increase preemptive strike risk calculations beyond acceptable thresholds. Simultaneously, Iran would signal through diplomatic channels that the systems represent defensive deterrent not intended for offensive use against American carriers unless Iran is attacked first. This scenario allows Iran to achieve strategic deterrence while giving the United States off-ramp for military response. American policymakers would face pressure to respond, but recognize that strikes risking failure or Iranian retaliation might prove worse than accepting new strategic reality. Israel would conduct enhanced intelligence collection and potentially cyber operations against the missile program, but likely avoid kinetic strikes without clear American backing. China would maintain plausible deniability while quietly supporting Iranian deployment through intelligence, sharing on American carrier movements and defensive countermeasures. This scenario transforms Persian Gulf into a higher-risk environment where American naval operations continue, but under revised risk calculations, accepting some carrier vulnerability. Scenario 3 represents catastrophic escalation, where Israeli or American military action against the missile program triggers broader regional conflict. Probability assessment, 28%. This nightmare pathway begins with Israeli intelligence assessment that Iran's new capability fundamentally threatens Israeli security by emboldening Iranian proxies and enabling future nuclear blackmail once Tehran achieves weapons capability. Israel conducts preemptive airstrikes against confirmed missile facilities using F-35 stealth aircraft, potentially in coordination with the United States or unilaterally if Washington refuses participation. Iran retaliates with ballistic missile strikes against Israeli cities and American bases across the region, potentially attempting to demonstrate anti-ship capability against naval vessels in Persian Gulf. The United States faces decision between massive retaliation destroying Iran's entire missile infrastructure and military command structure, or limited response risking perception of weakness. If American carrier is actually struck, even unsuccessfully, domestic political pressure for overwhelming retaliation becomes irresistible regardless of strategic logic. Within 96 hours, the region enters full-scale military conflict involving Israel, Iran, United States, and potentially Iranian proxies across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. Oil prices spike above $120 per barrel, global markets crash, and regional humanitarian catastrophe unfolds with hundreds of thousands of casualties. Watch for 5 critical indicators in the next 72 hours that will reveal which scenario is materializing. First, Chinese diplomatic messaging to Washington through back channels. If China sends senior envoy to meet American counterparts within 48 hours, diplomatic de-escalation remains possible. If no high-level contact occurs, China accepts escalation risk. Second, Iranian public statements from Supreme Leader Khamenei or Revolutionary Guard commanders. If they announce successful indigenous missile development, scenario 2 controlled escalation is unfolding. If they remain silent or issue only vague warnings, situation remains fluid. Third, American carrier positioning in the region. If the USS Abraham Lincoln or other carrier assets begin repositioning beyond 1,500-kilometer range from Iranian coast, Pentagon is taking the threat seriously and preparing for possible conflict. If carriers maintain current deployment patterns, assessment suggests intelligence gaps remain about actual capability. Fourth, Israeli military readiness indicators. If Israel activates reserve units, increases air defense alert levels, or conducts large-scale exercises, preemptive strike planning may be advancing. Fifth, global oil market reactions. If prices spike above $95 per barrel and remain elevated beyond normal volatility, markets are pricing in significant conflict probability. Commercial shipping insurance rates for Persian Gulf tanker traffic will also signal whether industry assesses heightened risk. I'm monitoring this situation minute by minute through satellite imagery analysis, signals intelligence reporting, and diplomatic source networks across 3 continents. When the next development breaks, whether through official announcements, military movements, or intelligence revelations, you will understand the strategic implications here before mainstream media even identifies the story. This is not routine weapons transfer. This is potential paradigm shift in Middle Eastern power balance that could reshape American military posture, trigger regional war, or establish new deterrence framework lasting decades. Subscribe to this channel immediately and activate all notifications. The analysis you're receiving right now represents synthesis of classified level detail from public sources that defense professionals monitor, but general audiences never access. You need this information because what happens in the next 72 to 96 hours will determine whether the Persian Gulf remains viable operational theater for American naval power or becomes contested battle space where carriers operate at existential risk. Drop a comment answering these questions. Do you think China actually provided functional DF-21 technology, or is this psychological warfare using rumors and satellite imagery misidentification? Do you assess Israel will conduct preemptive strikes or accept Iran's enhanced capability as new strategic reality? Do you believe Iran would actually attempt to strike an American carrier, or does possession of the capability provide sufficient deterrence without employment? I read every comment, and your analysis helps inform my ongoing coverage. The Chinese transport flights have stopped. The Pentagon emergency meeting just concluded. Intelligence agencies across 5 countries are analyzing the same satellite imagery, right now reaching different conclusions about what they're seeing. The next 72 hours determine everything. Thanks for watching, and remember, in geopolitical military crisis, the side that understands the strategic calculus first gains decision-making advantage that can mean the difference between peace and catastrophic war.